Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. If you're new here, in this week's episode we are going to talk about the cons or the disadvantages of working as a clinical psychologist. This is basically the part 2 to a video that I made recently about why psychology is the best career in the world, in my own biased opinion. For the sake of balance though, we're going to look at the disadvantages specifically relating to working as a clinical psychologist because that's the area I'm most familiar with. Sure, let's just dive straight into it. The first thing that I want to point out is how isolating clinical work can be. Obviously, it's a highly confidential role, so to paint you a picture, when a loved one asks you, hey, how was your day? You can't really give them a lot of detail other than, yeah, it was fine. So a lot of the closest people in your life aren't really going to know what you do at work, and they're not going to know just how tough some days can be. You also can't stay in touch with your clients for obvious ethical reasons, but it can be bittersweet saying goodbye to them when it's their time to leave. And the final thing is that you probably won't be working in a very social environment. The bulk of what you do is working one-on-one in a therapy room with a client. So this can be isolating in the sense that it's harder to use work as a platform where you socialize and meet new people. Now, while these are disadvantages that come with the profession in terms of isolation, there are definitely ways of mitigating this from happening. Instead of sharing how work is going with friends and family, you can always talk to peers as part of peer supervision. In my own experience, I have friends that are also psychologists. I meet up and talk with them pretty regularly. We have the chats. In a way, you know, it kind of feels like therapy. So you can definitely form stronger relationships with your colleagues and have a platform to talk about how work is going in this way. In terms of the environment, not working in a very social one, I personally really like this because it means that you don't have to deal with office politics, which is definitely, it's one of my pet peeves. But if having that social environment is important to you, there are ways you can go about this. You could look at working with a multidisciplinary team, or you could find a company that is a bit bigger that has space for a clinical psychologist where you can sort of get that opportunity. So yeah, ultimately, isolation is something that is more likely to come up in a profession such as clinical psychology. However, don't let this worry you if you want to go and pursue this career path, because there are a lot of things that you can do to minimize and even prevent this from happening. Next up, you are more prone to burnout working in this role, and this is for a couple of reasons. There is a lot of admin that comes with this profession. Prepping for the session, writing up client notes, writing up reports, writing up letters, and this means that it's not uncommon to be working overtime as a clinical psychologist. As a provisional psychologist, I think I work 2 to 3 days a week overtime. And if you're running your own business, you're not going to get paid for this either. The work that you're doing can also be extremely intensive. You might find yourself working with a number of complex presentations at once, and this can lead to things like emotional strain. The important thing to flag with this disadvantage though is that there's a lot of safeguarding that goes into preventing burnout from happening. Psychologists are encouraged not to take on more than they can handle, turn down client presentations that they don't feel comfortable working with, and if needed, only do part-time hours for client-related work. Clinical psychologists are also required to have a really good self-care routine. Like, there's a high chance that in a master's interview they're going to ask you, what is your self-care routine like? Because it's such an important requirement for this role, you do need to know how to take good care of yourself. Looking back, what really helped me personally was creating an identity for myself outside of study, outside of being a psychologist, really getting to know my hobbies and interests that had nothing to do with this profession. Like, as you can tell, filming became one of them. I find that it helps me to regulate and reset after work. I can go and do something that's completely non-work related, and it helps me switch off from this intensive but amazing part of my life. So maybe there'll be a bit of a learning curve for you in terms of working out how to look after yourself, but it's a process. It is something you can learn how to do. And if you're wanting to become a clinical psychologist, it's highly likely that you have great self-insight. So it's something that I think you can easily develop. Okay, so the final disadvantage of working as a clinical psychologist is that the profession can be restrictive. If you want to mix things up in your life, like maybe move into state, do some traveling, or even just switch to remote working, it's harder to do this as a clinical psychologist because you have a duty of care to the clients that you're seeing. You would need to give your clients a big heads up and do a lot of work around preparing them for this transition, particularly if they're very vulnerable. And if you're a clinical psychologist based in Australia, Australia, it's a lot harder for you to move overseas and continue working in this profession. In the UK, and I'm pretty sure in the USA as well, you have to have a PhD before you can start doing clinical work, whereas in Australia, the highest level that you need is a master's. Basically, you have to meet the other country's requirements, which isn't impossible, but it is hard and very annoying to do. On the flip side, however, if we start looking at the pros and this disadvantage, working as a clinical psychologist in Australia is an amazing opportunity in itself. The lifestyle down here is very relaxing, it's a very flexible profession, you're likely to earn a high income. You should go and watch my video on the pros of being a psychologist. And if traveling is something that is really important to you, there are still ways that you can get creative with this. In Australia, it's pretty feasible for you to set up your own business working as a clinical psychologist. And in this framework, you could choose to take a month or 2 months off each year that you dedicate just to traveling. This is just an example, but I hope that it illustrates that even though the profession of psychology can be restrictive, there are still ways that you can get creative and work around this. So I guess in sum, working as a clinical psychologist, like all professions, does have some drawbacks. And in this video, I've talked about the main 3 in my opinion: isolation, burnout, and it can be restrictive. But it all comes down to what you really want from a career. I can say that I absolutely love this profession. In spite of these disadvantages, this is the most meaningful work that I've ever done. And like every disadvantage in life, sometimes it comes down to how you frame it and also how you look outside the box. These were disadvantages that worried me when I was going into the profession, but I found ways around them. So I hope that this video gave you some more insight. I hope that it helps you on this journey, and I will see you in another one of my videos. Take care of yourself. Bye!